Hello, honeys, and welcome to our Pie Day special. I know it's a little late, but I've been in the mood to do something sweet for you all, so figured we would take just a brief foray into the history of pie in art, where it appears, how it appears, and when it looks delicious. This one's going to be a nice, short, sweet little episode for you all, so let's go ahead and get started. Going chronologically because it's convenient and there's not really a reason not to, we start today with Peter Claes's Still Life with Turkey Pie from 1627. Claes himself is considered one of the most important Dutch still life painters of the 17th century and is a pioneer of tabletop still lifes, best known for creating simple yet sensually immediate works. He often does carefully composed meals made out of bread, fruits, wines, and was especially celebrated for his techniques with three-dimensional forms, his ability to create rich texture, and play with light to create specific moods. Like many of his day, he often included memento moris, or reminders of mortality, time passing, life and death, in his paintings in order to inspire deep thought and reflection on life in his viewers. Although we don't see any memento moris in this work, we do see one, for example, in Vanitas of 1656, which features a skull and bone alongside an overturned chalice, burning incense, and script music. A quick but important note about Claes: he never really painted these tables overflowing with luxury products from all over the world until he fled to the northern Netherlands at the beginning of the 17th century. Once there, he began to do so in order to satisfy the local markets. And that's because the local markets were looking for representations of their lifestyle. Their new mercantile class wanted to see in the paintings these rarities, these luxuries that they were able to get a hold of for the first time in their lives represented in the art. That's why we see in this still life Zealand oysters, Chinese porcelain, turkey, which is originally from North America, a nautilus shell from the Pacific Ocean, pepper from India, and we know, unfortunately, that there was nutmeg in that turkey pie cultivated by enslaved people in Moluccas. Currently held by the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, this painting speaks to its moment in terms of economic wealth and the desires of those who had it. The work indicates plenitude, indicates bounty, and that's exactly the sort of thing that the Dutch markets were looking for at this time, to represent their own lifestyles or their aspirations. Moving forward a couple hundred years in time, our next piece is Hobo Stealing Pie by Norman Rockwell, created in 1928. Rockwell is an iconic American artist who was born in New York City in 1894 and died in 1978. Says the Smithsonian American Art Museum, he was a prolific artist who created more than 300 covers for the Saturday Evening Post, in addition to illustrating calendars, books, and other printed works. His work is recognizable for its embodiment of American family values and the subject matter: nuclear family, small-town life, mischievous children, and other humorous elements. You might know him best for his image of an American family seated around the table at Thanksgiving. But back to our image for today. Having published it themselves, the Saturday Evening Post describes the image, quote, "A hobo in 1928 is not faring so well. A family dog caught him stealing a pie, presumably left on a windowsill to cool. Rover is nipping him right where it counts," end quote. And indeed, the image is of a man quickly trying to run away from a dog who is mid-leap and appears to have caught the loops on the belt of the back of his pants. He looks alarmed, to say the least, as he carries the pie in hand, and his shoelaces fly out to either side, with his jacket also flaring behind him. Now, to be fair, Norman Rockwell's depictions of Americana frequently include pie or pie-eating time references. There are dozens of his artworks centered on Thanksgiving or set at diner counters, as well as images of Americans praying before a pie dessert, or even money-making from selling pie, and more. Consider that this image was created and published in 1928. Although that's before the stock market crash of October 1929, it's not unreasonable to think that it may be an actual reflection of some financial insecurity that Americans may already have been facing. In a sad way, the image almost foreshadows what was to come: the increased food insecurity, the concern over personal income. Although this image is all fun and games for now, there are hints of the darker future ahead and even some of the problems of the present hidden within this image. This is important to point out out as Rockwell's images of American family life and the families themselves are so heavily idealized, and for that reason have, in recent instances, come under fire for being problematic. Along with reinforcing traditional gender roles quite heavily, Rockwell also created some less than ideal images in terms of Black representation for the Post, for example, creating ones putting African Americans in a servile position for various white characters. However, it was clear he was affected by, conscious of the racial tensions of his day, and wanted to respond to them in a different way. So he moved over to Look magazine and published artwork that allowed him to respond in his own manner. Across the next 3 years, he created some of his most striking explorations of racial issues in various illustrations. For example, Southern Justice, published in 1965, made in response to the murder of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi in 1964, as well as 1964's The Problem We All Live With. As Rockwell evolved into becoming a more reality-representing artist, it's important to remember these pie-based origins and see how far he came in terms of not only artistic development, but also social commentary. Rockwell may have started with and continued to some degree with pies, but he was more an artist than many give him credit for. Moving right along, we next have Claes Oldenburg's Flying Pizza Pie from New York 10 of 1964. And I can already imagine the protests. Celia, this is not really a pie, it's pizza. You know what? They call it pizza pie. We're rolling with it. Just humor me. So the background on Oldenburg. Oldenburg was born in Sweden in 1929 and passed in New York City in 2022. He is one of the forefront artists of the 1960s conceptual and pop arts movements, best known for making monumental public sculptures of commonplace objects. For examples of those, our sources point to the made in 1969, reworked in 1974, Lipstick Ascending on Caterpillar Tracks in New Haven, Connecticut, Clothespin of 1976 in Philadelphia, Shuttlecocks 1992 in Kansas City, and Cupid's Span of 2002, a gigantic archer's bow in San Francisco. Oldenburg's artworks, from performances to writings, and even his famous so-called soft sculptures or cushiony objects resembling other symbols of Americana, tend to demonstrate his irreverent sense of humor, as well as his fascination with American consumerism. Oldenburg often creates an atypical sense of weightlessness, of movement and gesturalism, which is seen here in the look of the pizza almost flying or rolling across the canvas. Oldenburg has a habit of making hard-edged or motionless everyday objects look softer, more interactive with nature, as if they are in motion. Flying Pizza is a pretty small piece, measuring only 17¼ by 22 inches. It has a slightly textural look in the crust, but the red sauce dominating the artwork makes it feel more like a cherry pie, which is another reason of mine for including it. There's something about this joyful energy, the motion of the pie, that makes me smile, that stands out about this artwork to me and captures the sense of fun with family or friends, having the chance to sit and eat it together, pizza or pie. Our next couple of pieces are both by the man who might well be known as the king of patisserie in the arts, Wayne Thiebaud. A little biography for this artist. He was born in 1920 in Mesa, Arizona, and died in 2021 in Sacramento. Although he did not formally attend any art school, he learned through repetitive copying of early modernist masters such as post-impressionist Van Gogh and Fauvist Matisse. From today's sources, quote, "I began to heighten the edge effect and also to re-echo the shape around the edges to give more energy to the image. The color has to have what Matisse referred to as expanding propensities," end quote. Thiebaud first worked for 10 years as a commercial advertising designer between New York and California. He also held a cartoonist job at Walt Disney Studios, earning $14 a week before he launched his painting career in the mid-1950s. He may have done so at the encouragement of his new friends at the time, a group of abstract expressionists including Elaine and Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, and Barnett Newman, whose emotionally emotionally charged color field paintings deeply influenced Thiebaud's early stages. For more on the abstract expressionists as well as those artists, please see our episode, Art That Pisses People Off, Color Works, Bland or Brilliant. Thiebaud quickly made a name for himself, combining a number of interests then popular in American art, such as thick gestural brushwork, everyday subject matter, and commercial imagery, while updating the traditional still life genre using the sugary symbols of the age of mass production and consumption. Smithsonian Magazine makes two important notes, though, on Thiebaud's timing as well as his process. Quote, while Thiebaud is often thought of as part of the pop movement of the 1960s, his dessert work predated it, end quote, and, quote, while Andy Warhol and others mass-produced their work, Thiebaud labored over each piece, his hand apparent in each one, end quote. Because he so often emphasized the commodity nature of the objects in his work, even the edible ones, his pieces are often seen as either a critique or a celebration of American consumer culture. He was able to create that emphasis by taking extra care when handling the objects' appearance. He used serial repetitions, synthetic colors, and famously whipped paint as one would frosting, or use a palette knife as one would a frosting knife to spread the paint onto the canvas. Thiebaud moved on to San Francisco street views in the 1970s once he'd had his fill of cakes and other treats, and was again influenced by a fellow artist friend to do so, this time Richard Diebenkorn and his streetscapes. Thiebaud's own street images focus on intense verticality, with the actual boulevards, quote, unfolding like scrolls, end quote, according to our sources. And one last note about his food-based images before we start breaking them down. They've become some of the most iconic and enduring of the post-war period and are included in many prestigious museum collections today. Our first painting of his is simply titled Pies, Pies, Pies from 1961. As we can expect from his handling of the paint, the pies look 3D and frothy. There are subtle variations between each which seem true to life and the variations of natural lighting, while some edges are sharply linear for the baked goods, breaking the illusion just a tiny bit. The Smithsonian, however, who owns the image, has reported that because so many fingers have tried to swipe through the impasto meringues, a protective glass has been installed in front of it since it's hanging. Although the image is pretty simple, it's literally rows of pies on a countertop, it gains a sense of rhythm through this repetition and the slight variations. The neutral background of the canvas helps the eye focus on the pies, while the effective shadowing creates texture and depth. The toppings look luscious and creamy, and according to Christie's, Thiebaud himself once said, quote, the materials are used as a kind of metaphor for plentitude, end quote. And plentitude seems to be the message of this image, as one could never possibly eat this amount of pie in one sitting. Yet with no one featured in the image to help out the viewer, they're left to imagine this is all for them. And that's exactly the point. The diagonal orientation of the rows across the entire counter surface expanse and the overfilled look of the pie slices is meant to act as a delicious reminder of the 1960s American dream of mass consumerism and bountifulness. Of course, it hits a little more nostalgically now, but still evokes the same American ideals of consumption, prosperity, and optimism. Our next piece from 1963 is appropriately titled Pie Counter. What might be the most fascinating part about this image is that it looks so much like Pies, 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 yet comes after Thiebaud has his big break. In 1962, he begins a close friendship with his art dealer Alan Stone and has his first solo show in New York at Stone's Gallery that spring. That show caught the attention of the New York art world and was attended by, among many, Warhol, Newman, and Elaine de Kooning. Ultimately, the good press led to his national recognition as well as commercial success. His works went on to be included in the pivotal pop art group exhibition curated by Walter Hopps at the Pasadena Art Museum, along with other famous names like Roy Lichtenstein the same year. As we hinted at with that earlier Smithsonian Magazine quote, art critics and art historians of the day constantly lumped his works in with the concurrent pop art movement. But, and this may explain why his artwork did not look different after his big break, his concentration on commonplace objects began before that movement took hold, and he resisted such categorization, saying, quote, I have always exhibited in pop art shows but don't see myself as being in any way central to that category, end quote. It may have been Thiebaud's own personal resistance to categorization categorization that leaves his works somewhere in the middle and not necessarily evolving directly parallel with the rest of the pop artists. In Pie Counter, he once again uses vernacular foodstuff to explore artistic concepts like composition, color, light, texture. But unlike most of his pop art contemporaries who are eliminating any nuances, any sign of touch and gesture in their work, Thibaud continues to exploit the physical properties of paint in an effort to mimic the real look and feel of the substance being depicted. Says the Whitney, quote, "By combining this physical treatment of paint with the rigid geometry of triangular pie slices and circular plates arranged in a grid composition against the counter's neutral background, Thibaud made a work that is simultaneously representational and abstract," end quote. Although Thibaud moves on with his career, his focus, his subject matter, the desserts never really leave him entirely. And so the last work of his that we will look at for today is titled Untitled Neapolitan Pie and comes from right around 1990. This is a very small image at just under 60 by 48 centimeters and shows just a singular pie on a plate in the center of the image. The colors within the pie, interestingly, match the pastel tones of the counter, with the separations indicated just by a couple of cool tones mimicking shadows. And here we see a bit of Thibaud's evolution because the cake and the counter appear to be made of the same substance. There's no variation in texture between the two. This piece, as a drawing, has some visible sketch marks to it as well, breaking the illusion of exact reality. The pie is also cut so that it is missing the front 1/3. It almost resembles a peace sign in some ways. So this 1990 work by Thibaud is by far his most abstract of a dessert and shows kind of his evolution across his entire career when compared with our previous two. And the last image we're going to explore today is called Pie Face by Lisa Yuskavage from 2007. I gotta admit, I have a slight bias towards this artist as she was one I featured in my thesis essay. Born in 1962, Yuskavage does two main things with her artwork, according to our sources and my own research. She combines the sort of elements you would see in the works of old masters with elements of kitsch, pop culture, and caricature. She says herself, quote, "I want to marry both aspects of myself. Poor white trash girl loves Italian Renaissance," end quote. Her artworks are often discussed through a feminist lens and seen as parodies of the male gaze that historically dominates the female nude tradition. Though the artist herself doesn't fully embrace this and prefers to see her own work a little more ambiguously. In this particular painting, we see a woman standing in what appears to be a bathroom, her face covered in pie cream that falls down onto the top of her breasts. As is the case with many of Yuskavage's works, the feathery light brush strokes here give the whole thing, but especially the pie cream, an airy feeling, and the figure a sort of ultra softness. What's unique about this work among the others we've covered today is that there's a question of narrative here. We don't know why this woman has pie all over her face, why she continues to look rather seductively towards us, the viewers, or where she really even is. The background appears to be bricks with a curtain held off to the side, but it's unclear whether those are maybe shower tiles or what exactly is going on here. Furthermore, the pie all over the figure's face hides it. We're left to wonder if that's meant to obscure her identity, if it means that maybe she's hiding behind the cream, a la Mrs. Doubtfire. What exactly is going on here? This is notably one of a few different Yuskavage artworks in which a woman standing featured has pie on her face. However, the others are full-length nude portraits. Yuskavage shows a sort of atypical restraint here, a naturalism in the coloring of the figure's skin, shirt, and hair tones. My best guess is that this woman character represents the sort of uncertainty that comes with revealing oneself, or perhaps putting on airs to make oneself seem more desirable. As you can tell, honeys, I still have a lot of questions remaining about this piece, and I'm sure you do too. Maybe we can figure it out together. Drop some comments. Now that will conclude our artwork analysis portion for the day, honeys, but I thought we would take a moment to check out a pie-related story that recently came to our attention as a special little closer. Within the last month, a painting featuring half-eaten pie, which was gathering dust in an Australian school, turned out to be a Dutch masterpiece worth millions. The work in question is simply called Still Life and was created in 1640 by the Dutch painter Gerrit Williams Heda. His famous father, William Klaas Heda, whose own paintings have sold for as much as 8.2 million US at auction, may have helped him with the work. The painting is done atop 2 panels of oak hardboard and depicts a lush tabletop feast with a half-eaten pie and an overturned goblet. So we once again have pie, and this time we do have a memento mori. This painting is one of a 36-object trust that was recently set to conservators for cleaning. The restorers discovered a diminutive signature on a knife hidden below the varnish, indicating that it belonged to Heda. This relatively standard still life lived for nearly 150 years before that discovery at the old private school Woodford Academy, a 20th century one in the Blue Mountains of Australia, now owned by the National Trust of Australia. That trust is looking into exactly how the Dutch painting may have ended up in the nation, with one early theory suggesting it was acquired in the 1870s by one Alfred Fairfax, nephew of Sydney Morning Herald founder James Fairfax, who would have brought it to the continent, and who had bought the Woodford property just a few years prior, long before it ever became a school. Before the signature discovery, the painting was only valued at about 200,000 US, but with this and the reevaluation, it may reach as high as 5 million US. Said the collections manager for the National Trust, Rebecca Pynchon, quote, "We believed the artwork might be an authentic 17th century painting, but finding the artist's signature felt like a 1 in a million chance. This is a remarkable story of discovery which has taken us on a journey across a number of years, piecing together and validating the work through expert advice and technology," end quote. She also added, quote, "An interesting characteristic of Heda still lifes is that there is always a plate half off the table. It's symbolic of the transient nature of life. One minute you have comfort and pleasure, the next you can fall into bad times," end quote. Sure enough, you can spy that here, right in the middle of the work at the front left corner. All right, honeys, that is our 2025 Pi Day special. Hope you've enjoyed this little walk through the dessert side of art history. We hope you have enjoyed your 2025 Pi Day special, and as always, we will see you with the next business. Until then, go ahead and hydrate or dehydrate. Take care. We'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.